My wife left for a month with the hot new neighbor. Now she wants me back, but I'm not a backup. I guess I'm writing this to get it out of my system. My name is Stephan. I'm 30, and until recently, I thought I had my life under control. I've always been a simple guy, no big dreams, no crazy drama. I had a stable career as a software developer, a decent house in a quiet neighborhood, and, until recently, I believed I had a strong marriage with a woman I truly loved. Emily and I met almost 8 years ago. Looking back, it seems like a lifetime ago. I was 23, fresh out of college, working my first job and frankly naive about life. She was 22, working as an assistant at a marketing agency while trying to figure out her own career path. For the record, she never did, eventually becoming a stay-at-home wife. We met at a mutual friend's barbecue, one of those casual backyard gatherings where everyone eats off cheap paper plates, and someone always burns the burgers. She approached me and made a snarky joke about how I looked like I was planning my escape. I can't recall my response, but she laughed, and we ended up talking for the rest of the evening. From that moment, everything moved quickly. We started dating, and it felt like she added excitement to my otherwise mundane and routine life. Emily was adventurous and spontaneous, always planning last-minute road trips or dragging me to a new restaurant she had heard about. Meanwhile, I was the grounded one, the one to figure out the budget, check the weather, and double-check the gas tank before we hit the road. It seemed to work. We balanced each other out. She brought excitement into my life, and I offered her the steadiness she claimed she lacked in previous relationships. After 3 years of dating, we decided to get married. The wedding was intimate, just relatives and close friends. We didn't come from wealthy families, so there was no grand ballroom or extravagant catering, but that didn't matter. After the wedding, we started building our life together. We bought a small 2-bedroom house in a quiet suburb. Not the fanciest place, but it had potential. For the most part, things seemed stable. When I got home from work, Emily was usually in the kitchen or on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She would tell me stories from her day. She worked in marketing at the time, so there was always some drama with clients or coworkers. I listened. That was our dynamic. She was the storyteller and I was the listener. We didn't have children, but that was a mutual decision. Emily wasn't in a rush and neither was I. We both wanted to wait until we were more financially stable and truly ready for that next big step. Looking back, I wonder if I became too comfortable. It's easy to fall into a routine when life feels stable. I would wake up, go to work, come home, and repeat. Sure, we had date nights, usually dinner at one of our favorite restaurants or a movie, but I think I stopped noticing the small things, like how Emily seemed to thrive on attention. It wasn't a huge issue, not at first. She was the kind of person who could light up a room, and people naturally gravitated toward her. I guess I took her energy and warmth for granted, assuming they would always be a part of our life together. At the time, I wasn't worried. I thought we were solid. Sure, we had disagreements now and then, what marriage doesn't. Most of the time, it was about little things like me forgetting to take out the trash or her leaving her shoes all over the house. Nothing major. But the thing about relationships is that they can look perfectly fine on the surface while cracks are forming beneath. And if you don't pay attention, those cracks can spread and bring the whole foundation crumbling down. I didn't see it coming, not at the time. I thought we were building something strong and lasting. But sometimes, life has a way of proving you wrong. James moved in next door when our elderly neighbors downsized and relocated to Florida. He was around 28 at the time, one of the youngest people in the neighborhood. A personal trainer, fit, confident, and honestly way too attractive for his own good. He had that kind of physique that made people do a double take, like he had just walked off the set of an action movie. But it wasn't just his looks that made him stand out. He was always outside doing something, washing his car, mowing the lawn, setting up a pull-up bar in his yard. And, conveniently, he always seemed to find a reason to be shirtless. Emily noticed him immediately. How could she not? We officially met James one Saturday morning when he walked over to introduce himself while we were outside. He was friendly, the kind of guy who could charm anyone. Emily struck up a conversation instantly, asking where he was from, what he did for a living, how he liked the neighborhood. I stood there smiling and nodding while they chatted like old friends. At the time, I didn't think much of it. Emily was outgoing. She talked to everyone. She'd be just as chatty with the mailman or the cashier at the grocery store. I had no reason to think there was anything unusual about her interest in James. But looking back, I can see the subtle shifts that started happening after that. At first, it was casual conversations. Emily always found an excuse to be outside when James was. What used to be quick tasks, getting the mail, watering the plants, putting out the trash, suddenly turned into 10 or 15-minute chats in the driveway. One evening, I came home from work and found them talking by James's car. Emily was holding a laundry basket like she had been on her way to the garage, but instead, she was laughing at something he had said. When I walked up, they both turned to me, and Emily played it off like it was nothing. James was just telling me about his new gym equipment, she said casually. It didn't stop there. A few weeks later, Emily suddenly decided to bake cookies. something she hadn't done in months. At first, I thought nothing of it, until I saw her heading across the yard with a plate of them. Just being neighborly, she said when I asked. And sure, Emily had always been friendly with our neighbors, but something about this was different. Then she went out and bought a brand new set of workout clothes, bright, fitted leggings and a matching top. Not her usual style. When I asked about it, she told me she was thinking of getting back into jogging. To get back in shape, she explained. I didn't question it. Emily had gone through fitness phases before, getting excited about working out for a month or two before losing interest. But this time, her timing was a little too perfect. James jogged every morning, and suddenly, Emily decided she wanted to start running at the same time James was out there. I noticed them one morning as I was leaving for work. Emily stretching on the sidewalk while James showed her a technique to avoid shin splints. I waved and they both waved back. I didn't say anything, but something about the scene stuck with me. Then I noticed her phone habits changing. Emily had always been on her phone, scrolling through social media, texting friends. But now she seemed careful. If I walked into the room, she'd quickly lock her screen or flip the phone over. One night I caught a glimpse of her screen. She was on Instagram, and at the very top of her feed, James's profile. She quickly scrolled past it, but I had already seen it. When I asked her about it, she brushed it off. I was just checking out his fitness posts, she said. He has some good workout tips. I wanted to believe her, so I let it go. But the little things kept adding up. One evening, I was working in the garage when I heard laughter from the backyard. I stepped outside and saw Emily and James standing by the fence, laughing. Emily was holding an iced tea, and James was gesturing wildly, telling some animated story. Emily waved at me like nothing was unusual. James was just telling me something funny that happened at his gym. She explained later when I asked about it. It was starting to feel off. And here's the thing. I'm not the paranoid type, but when you've been with someone long enough, you notice when something shifts. Emily's conversations about James had a different energy. She casually mentioned things he said or did. James's thinking about getting a dog. James recommended this great protein shake. It wasn't what she was saying, it was how she was saying it. Then there were the glances. When we were outside and James was nearby, Emily would steal quick glances in his direction. It was subtle, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. At this point, I still hadn't said anything. Part of me didn't want to believe there was anything going on. I trusted Emily. We had been together for years, and I thought we had a solid marriage. But another part of me, the part that couldn't ignore the pattern, started questioning everything. So I decided to pay closer attention. If something was happening, I needed to see it for myself. It was a Saturday morning, and I remember it vividly because it started off so normal. I woke up early, like I always did, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through the news on my phone. Emily was still in bed, which wasn't surprising. She loved her slow mornings, especially on weekends. The house was quiet. The only sound was the faint hum of the coffee machine. For a brief moment, everything felt peaceful. Funny how that works. You think everything is fine because you have no idea what's about to happen. Emily finally came into the kitchen about an hour later. She was still in her pajamas, her hair tangled from sleep, holding her phone in one hand while rubbing her eyes with the other. She sat across from me at the table, and I could tell right away that something was off. She had this nervous energy, drumming her fingers on the table, glancing at her phone like she was avoiding eye contact. "You okay?" I asked, setting down my phone. She nodded quickly, then hesitated. "Actually, no," she sighed heavily. "We need to talk." And there it was. Anyone who's been in a relationship knows that those 4 words never mean anything good. My stomach twisted, but I kept my face neutral. "All right," I said, leaning back in my chair. "What's going on?" Emily took a deep breath, her gaze flickering around the room like she was trying to find the right words. Finally, she looked me in the eye. "I don't know how to say this, so I'm just going to say it." She swallowed hard. "I think I have feelings for James." For a second, I thought I misheard her. "What?" I asked, leaning forward, as if getting closer would somehow make her words make sense. She bit her lip, looking guilty. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said quickly, like she was trying to get the words out before I could react. "It just happened. I've been spending time with James and I feel this connection and now I'm confused. Confused." That word hit me harder than anything else she said. She wasn't telling me she had made a mistake. She wasn't saying she regretted it. She was telling me she was confused. Like this was some kind of puzzle she needed to solve. I stared at her, my mind racing. Was she saying she wanted to leave? Was she asking for a divorce? Was she trying to confess and move on? Couldn't tell. And that made it worse. "So what does this mean?" I finally asked. "Are you saying you're done with us?" Emily shook her head quickly. "No, not necessarily," she said. I don't know what I want right now. I love you, Stephan, I do. But I can't stop thinking about him, and I need to figure out what these feelings mean. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. We had been together for years. We had built a life together. And now she was saying she wasn't sure if she wanted to be with me anymore? It didn't feel real. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. So, what are you saying? You want to take a break? She hesitated, then nodded. She admitted. I need time to figure things out. I was thinking, maybe I could take a month to spend some time with James and see if there's something real there. If it doesn't work out, then we can focus on ourselves. I blinked. She was serious. You're serious? I asked, not even framing it as a question. She nodded, her expression almost pleading. I know it sounds crazy, but I don't want to throw away what we have without being sure. I don't want to live with regrets, Regrets. That word sat in my chest like a stone. She was talking about her regrets, as if she was the one making the biggest sacrifice here. As if my feelings were just an afterthought in her grand, soul-searching experiment. I stared at her, my emotions boiling beneath the surface. Anger, betrayal, disbelief. Part of me wanted to yell. Another part of me, the calmer, more calculated part, decided to stay quiet. Let her dig her own hole. All right, I said, leaning back in my chair. Emily blinked, looking surprised. Wait. Really? Sure, I said, shrugging like it was no big deal. If you think that's what you need, go ahead. Her face flickered with uncertainty, like she expected me to fight, to argue, to beg her to stay. I just think it's the best way to figure out where my heart is, she said carefully. Sure, I repeated, but inside I was already done. The moment she said she wanted to spend a month with another man, something in me switched off. But I wasn't going to show my cards just yet. If she was willing to throw away our marriage for a fantasy, I was curious to see just how far she'd take it. Emily let out a relieved sigh, like I had granted her permission to do something brave and noble. Thank you, she said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. I know this is a lot to ask, but I really believe it's the right thing for us. I stood up, grabbed my coffee mug, and pulled my hand away. Sure, I said flatly. If that's what you need. She said nothing after that. She just sat there, probably wondering why I wasn't reacting the way she expected. But I had already started planning. Emily spent the next few days packing a small bag. She told me she'd be staying with James, and she made it sound casual. Like this was just a temporary thing. She didn't seem to notice that I wasn't asking questions, that I wasn't protesting, that I wasn't fighting for her. When she finally walked out the door, it felt different. Not empty, not heartbreaking, just quiet, like someone had turned down the volume on my life. And I realized something in that moment. I didn't feel the crushing pain of losing her. I felt relief. When Emily left, the house felt different. Not empty, not lonely, just quieter. I stood in the living room after she walked out, her duffel bag slung over her shoulder, and stared at the door. I expected to feel anger or heartbreak, but instead, I felt something else entirely, relief. Like a weight had finally been lifted. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and just stood there, trying to process what had just happened. My wife, who I had spent nearly a decade with, had just left to explore her feelings for another man. The guy next door, no less. If this hadn't been my life, I would have thought it was some ridiculous soap opera plot. The first few days without her felt strange. I started noticing the little things she had left behind. Her favorite coffee mug still sitting on the counter, a pair of her shoes near the front door, the blanket she always used draped over the couch. At first, I thought about moving them, but then I decided to leave them right where they were. Not because I missed her, but because I didn't want to waste energy cleaning up after someone who had already walked out on me. Instead, I poured myself into anything that kept me busy. I took on extra work projects, staying late at the office, not because I had to, but because I didn't want to come home to a quiet house. When I wasn't working, I hit the gym, pushing myself harder than I ever had before. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about getting in shape to make her regret leaving. It was about control. I needed something to focus on, something that wasn't her. Friends started noticing that something was off. A few of them asked where Emily was, and I just shrugged. She's staying with a friend for a while, I'd say casually, dodging the real story. I wasn't ready to tell people the truth yet. The only person I was honest with was my dad. I called him a few days after Emily left. As soon as he picked up, the first thing he said was, "What's wrong?" He's always been able to read me, even over the phone. When I told him everything, there was a long pause. Then he let out a heavy sigh and said, "Well, son, I hate to say it, but it sounds like you're better off without her." At first, I wasn't sure how to respond. I expected him to be angrier or to have more questions. But then he said something that stuck with me. "If she doesn't know your worth, why should you wait around for her to figure it out?" And he was right. I had spent so much time trying to process her choices, wondering where I went wrong, that I never stopped to ask myself, what do I deserve? That night, I sat in the dimly lit living room, staring at the framed wedding photo on the mantel. We looked so happy in that picture, so sure of our future. But now, that photo didn't feel like a memory. Felt like a lie. By the end of that week, I had made my decision. I wasn't going to sit around and wait for Emily to decide if I was good enough to come back to. I was going to make my own decision. The next day, I called a divorce attorney. Sitting in that office felt surreal. I explained everything to the lawyer, how Emily had walked out, how she had openly admitted she was staying with another man, how she expected me to just wait around while she figured out if she still wanted me. The lawyer listened intently, nodding as I spoke. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, "You're well within your rights to file for divorce. This falls under irreconcilable differences." Hearing those words made something click in my head. Irreconcilable differences. That's what we had become. We weren't on the same page anymore. Maybe we never had been. The lawyer walked me through the process, outlining what needed to be done. By the time I left his office, I felt strangely calm, like I had finally taken my life back. Back home, I started preparing for the inevitable. I quietly moved some money into a separate account, just in case things got messy later. I walked through the house and began mentally dividing what was mine and what was hers. I didn't touch her things, not yet. But in my head, I was already planning for a life without her. The days stretched into weeks, and I got used to the silence. And you know what? It wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. In fact, it was kind of nice. I didn't have to listen to Emily's constant chattering. I didn't have to deal with small, pointless arguments over who was supposed to take out the trash or whose turn it was to pick the restaurant for date night. It was just me, and it felt peaceful. But then, the gossip started. A neighbor casually mentioned seeing Emily and James at the park, looking cozy. Someone else claimed they had spotted them at a downtown cafe, laughing over coffee. I just nodded and smiled like it didn't bother me. But inside, I felt a mix of rage and pity. Rage, because she had thrown away everything we built for some fling with a guy who was never going to stick around. Pity, because I knew it wouldn't end well for her. James didn't seem like the settling down type. And Emily? She was about to learn that the hard way. By the third week, I had stopped checking my phone for her texts. I figured if she wanted to talk, she'd reach out. But I wasn't holding my breath. I was done waiting. One night, while cleaning out the garage, I found a box of old photos. Pictures from when Emily and I had first met. For a brief moment, I felt a sharp stab of sadness. We had been happy once. But then I thought about all the red flags I had ignored over the years, all the times I had prioritized her needs over mine without even realizing it. I closed the box and shoved it aside. I didn't need those memories anymore. Almost exactly a month after she left, Emily finally came home. I hadn't heard much from her while she was with James. A few vague texts here and there, "Hope you're doing okay," or "We'll talk when I get back," like I was just supposed to sit around and wait for her to make up her mind. By this point, I had stopped caring. I had filed for divorce. The paperwork was already in motion. As far as I was concerned, the marriage was over. But she didn't know that yet. When she walked through the door, she looked exactly the same. Her bag slung over her shoulder, her hair neatly done, her expression confident, like she had just come back from a vacation. "Hey," she said, dropping her bag by the door. "I'm back." I barely looked up from the couch. "Welcome back," I said flatly. She hesitated like she was expecting more of a reaction. Then she walked over and perched on the arm of the couch. "We should talk," she said. I turned to face her, muted the TV, and crossed my arms. "All right," I said. "Talk." Emily smiled. Not the nervous, guilty kind of smile. The kind of smile she used when she was trying to charm her way out of trouble. "I've done a lot of thinking," she started, folding her hands in her lap. "And I've realized some things. About myself, about us, about what I really want." I just nodded, waiting for her to continue. She took a deep breath, like she was about to deliver some grand, emotional speech. "Stephan, I care about you. I really do. And I think we can work through this. I think we can rebuild what we have." She said it so casually, as if it were that simple. As if all she had to do was say the words and I'd just forget everything that had happened. "Rebuild," I repeated, my voice flat. She nodded eagerly. "James is a great guy," she said, and I nearly laughed at how casually she brought him up. But I realized, he's not what I need. He's fun, sure, but he's immature. He doesn't have the stability that you have. I think I just got caught up in the excitement of it all. There it was, her big revelation. She tried out the shiny new toy and decided she liked the old one better. "Uh-huh," I muttered, my expression unreadable. Emily blinked, clearly expecting a bigger reaction. "I know I hurt you," she continued, reaching out to touch my arm. "But I really believe we can get past this. We've been through so much together, Stephan. We have history. That's not something you just throw away." She looked at me like she was waiting for me to agree. waiting for me to tell her she was right, waiting for me to say that we could fix things. I didn't. Instead, I got up, walked to the kitchen, and pulled something out of the drawer, a stack of divorce papers. I placed them on the table in front of her. Her smile faded. "What's this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Divorce papers," I said simply. Her face went pale. "You're kidding," she let out a nervous laugh. "Nope," I said, arms crossed. "I'm not kidding." For a moment, she just stared at the papers like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Then she looked up at me with wide, desperate eyes. "You're divorcing me?" "Yeah," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not interested in being your second choice, Emily." Her shock turned to anger in an instant. "Second choice?" she repeated, her voice rising. "That's not what this is." I was confused, Stephan. I needed time to figure things out. I shook my head, unimpressed. "And in the process, you decided to test the waters with another man," I said calmly. "You left. You walked out on our marriage. And now you're back because it didn't work out with him. Do you really think I'm just going to take you back like nothing happened?" Emily opened her mouth to argue but closed it again. Her face turned red. She was losing control of the conversation, and she knew it. "It's not like that," she insisted, her voice shaking. "I was trying to do the right thing. I didn't want to stay and resent you. I thought—" She trailed off, her eyes darting around the room, as if searching for the right words. "You thought you could have it both ways," I finished for her. She crossed her arms tightly. "You're making a mistake, Stephan," she said, her tone shifting from desperate to frustrated. "We can fix this." "I know we can." I shook my head. "No, we can't." Her breath hitched. "You made your choice, Emily. Now I'm making mine." For the first time, she looked defeated. Her shoulders sagged. Her lips parted like she wanted to say something else. One last argument, one last plea, but nothing came out. Finally, in a barely audible voice, she asked, "What am I supposed to do now?" I sighed, and for a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her. "That's not my problem anymore," I said simply. She stood there for another long moment. Then, without another word, she grabbed her bag and walked out the door. I didn't follow. I didn't call after her. I just stood there, watching her go, feeling nothing but relief. After that, the divorce process moved fast. Emily tried to stall at first, maybe hoping I'd change my mind, but my lawyer was sharp. The proof of her walking out made things pretty clear-cut. She even tried to push for spousal support, claiming she had given up her career for our marriage. The judge didn't buy it. In the end, we reached a fair settlement. She got a small payout and some furniture she had picked out. I got to keep the house and the majority of my savings. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than I expected. The final court hearing was bittersweet. Sitting in that courtroom, signing the papers that would officially end our marriage, felt strange. I glanced at Emily a few times. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days. When her lawyer handed her the pen, she hesitated, just for a moment before signing. That was it. The marriage was officially over. As we walked out of the courtroom, Emily approached me. Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper. "Stephan, I'm sorry for everything." I looked at her, searching for the woman I had once loved. But all I saw was someone I used to know. "I know you are," I said. "But sorry doesn't fix this." Her eyes welled up with tears. She reached out like she wanted to hug me. One last desperate attempt to hold on. But I stepped aside. "Take care of yourself, Emily," I murmured. Then I walked away. I'd hear things about Emily through the grapevine every now and then. James? He moved on to someone else almost immediately after she left him. Last I heard, Emily was staying with a relative, trying to figure out her next move. I didn't feel happy about her downfall, but I didn't feel sorry for her either. She had made her choices. Now she had to live with them. One day, I ran into her at the grocery store. Our eyes met for a brief second. She gave me a hesitant wave. I just nodded and walked past her. There was nothing left to say. Looking back, I don't regret a thing. Emily thought she could have it both ways. She thought she could chase something new and come back to me when it didn't work out. But life doesn't work that way. I've learned a lot through this. I know now that I deserve someone who chooses me, without hesitation. And if that person is out there, great. If not, that's okay too. Because for the first time in a long time, I'm finally at peace.